Hello everyone and welcome back to episode 3 of our second season of painting a Song of Ice and Fire tabletop game miniatures. This time around, as you've seen, we're painting Cersei Lannister, Jaime Lannister as a prisoner, and Bronn the Sellsword. First off, apologies for recording sick last week, but I just had to get the episode done and my cold wasn't going away as fast as I wanted to. I'm feeling a bit better now, so hopefully this episode can be a little more energetic. This time around, we're going to be carrying on with coloring in our miniatures and just working on all those block areas, sort of the base colors for them. Of particular interest, we're going to be working on the hair for the two Lannisters, which can be a little bit difficult. I certainly, I didn't do it right the first time I did a Jaime Lannister miniature, or at least in my opinion, and this time it did come out looking significantly better. The big secret here, and it's not much of a secret, is I'm mixing brown into my yellow ink, as you can see on the screen right now. Mixing a little bit of brown into the yellow ink gives a much better blonde effect, much as the first time I didn't put very much brown in, like I didn't moderate it very much, and I tried to keep it very yellow, because obviously the yellow, the goldenness of the Lannisters' hair is often emphasized in the text. Mixing in some brown does a lot to make it look more natural. There I am fighting a bubble. But yeah, so I'm mixing in about 2-to-1 yellow to brown right now. I'm trying to spread it out a little bit, get it a little more yellow, because I do still want it to pop. But what you're going to end up getting is you're going to get the darkest of the colors, as per usual, settling in the crevices. So 3-4-to-1, you know, experimenting as we go along. But the darkest color is going to be settling into the crevices as you go. And in this case, the darkest color is going to be the brownest color. Everything high up is going to get dyed more yellow, it's going to be lighter, there's not as much ink is going to settle there, right? And in the deep areas, that's where it's going to get kind of brown. And that's going to give a lot of depth to the hair. If you just go for a mainly yellow sort of look, you're really going to get just sort of highlighter yellow hair, even once we put the primer on, much as the primer will kind of help it. So make sure you have a hearty amount of brown mixed in there, or something else to try and give your hair depth. We're going to go at it here and just start applying that fairly liberally across their hair. And, of course, not forgetting his beard now that he's a prisoner and he's all gruff and grown out. I've given just enough time for all of the ink to dry that I've previously put on, but not that much more time than that. Like I've mentioned earlier, I did all this in a single Sunday morning, trying to push the speed at which I could complete several miniatures, basically, using these techniques. I thought maybe with the ink drying it would be a little slower than speed painting with acrylics, but really I wasn't that disappointed. The overall painting time, even including some of the drying time, only came out to about 2.5 hours to maybe 3 hours for 3 miniatures. So that's somewhere between 45 minutes and an hour to a miniature, which isn't the fastest. There's definitely some speed painting techniques out there that are much faster than this, especially ones that use sort of quick washes, like the Citadel Agrax Earthshade and whatever that black one is. Null Oil, that's the one. I haven't really tried those, so I can't really vouch for them. I just haven't been able to justify paying that amount for them when I can get inks cheaper from my local art store. That being said, I do want to experiment with them sometime in the future, so I will be looking into getting some, and hopefully I can use some in the future episode. As well, I'll be trying to replicate their effects using my Flow Improver, inks, and some household products, just to try and get you an even cheaper, larger volume solution for washing. To get an effect similar to the washes that Citadel has, rather than these washes, which are really just inks. We're not doing much to them. In this case, going along with the hair, I'm not thinning anything either. I want to make sure that the yellow-brown ink is settling very well, and we are getting that brown effect in the creases. That's also why I'm going fairly heavily. You're going to want to police it a little bit. As you can see here, I'm going to try and spread out areas where it's pooling unnaturally, but you are going to want to promote some pooling just to give you the effect of it being yellow where the sun strikes and slightly browner and a little more natural where the sun isn't shining directly on it. Just keep that in mind as you go along with painting this blonde hair for them, and you should get a pretty nice effect. Like I said previously, these miniatures I was really, really proud of what I was able to do in the amount of time I gave myself, especially with Cersei. Now, there are some design decisions I do with Cersei later on that I sort of take back retroactively. I've corrected them, and we'll discuss those a little more when I get there. But that was just a matter of I wanted to try something, it didn't quite work out, and even then I was bold enough to give it a shot and get an idea of where my skill was at and where my techniques are at. At every stage in this, like I say in pretty much every episode and every season, you know, be experimental, push your limits a little bit, and try something new. If you're not going to do that, then I guess you're just going to stay static. That's perfectly, hey, if you got a great painting technique and you love it, great. But if you're only preventing yourself from trying new things because you're worried about ruining miniatures, I've got a previous episode on stripping. It's super easy. You can just look that up. Use simple green. Heck, you can even use isopropyl alcohol or other products, although obviously check the safety instructions on products like that. They work really well, but they're very bad for your health. But stripping is not that hard, and correcting things on the fly isn't that hard. Using paint and stuff like that, you can really layer paint on top of each other to correct small issues. It's really not that bad. So just try and keep pushing yourself, because I think you'll really be impressed. I've personally been impressed at how much I've been able to improve my painting over the last 3 years-ish since I picked the hobby back up. Right now all I'm doing is I'm thinning out some black ink. I'm going to need to thin this immensely using my flow improver here to try and avoid any tide marks and any issues with the consistency as I apply it onto the miniatures. But what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get sort of a gray. Bronn, the sellsword, is man, it could not be more generic fantasy if he tried. He's got a lot of leather, a lot of browns, a lot of blacks. It actually turns out looking really cool, so I'm pretty happy with that. I have tried to alternate so that no two areas are the same color right next to each other, and I think that helps a lot in giving him a little bit of visual interest and making him look more designed. But yeah, so our thinned black is just going to serve to make a grayish color across a lot of his body, making it look like it's maybe black clothes that have faded slightly in the sun, or that are getting some really nice highlights like on these boots here. While I'm painting up Bronn here, we're going to have quite a bit of time. He's mainly black. He's black all over. There are very few parts of him that aren't either black or brown. So this is going to take quite a bit of time. But you'll see kind of, hopefully, this real-time tutorial process that I'm having here will let you kind of follow along with how I'm applying the ink over different areas. I admit it's not all that different every time, but I personally have always wanted series of real-time painting tutorials alongside the sort of more summed up, more, you know, edited heavily and or accelerated, you know, time accelerated, sped up tutorials that are very, very prominent on YouTube. Obviously those are excellent, and that's why I'm trying to finish every season with one. If you haven't seen it yet, go back and look at my sum up episode, or Même chose en français. If you are French, si vous êtes francophone, je suis bilingue, fait que je vais faire des épisodes en anglais puis en français à la fin de chaque saison. If you're not French, it's not super relevant to you, but there you go. There is the option of bilingual episodes if you're looking to learn some French technical terms. I'm actually learning French technical terms from this as well, because I actually never really got into the hobby while I was living in anywhere French. But that's neither here nor there. You can go back and see those summed up episodes, but if you, like me, wanted to just follow along with someone at a casual pace working through the painting of a miniature, hopefully these episodes are more for you. If you want to be following along with exactly what I'm doing, I am not able to provide links to the miniatures themselves, but they are a very, very large company, Cool Mini or not. They produce not only the A Song of Ice and Fire tabletop game, but many other tabletop games containing miniatures, which you may be interested in. What I can link to in my description, however, and you'll see this, is Amazon affiliate links to all of the equipment that I use that I feel it's relevant to recommend online. A significant amount of this is available locally, and I do strongly recommend you look for it locally beforehand if you're going to try and buy it online, just because you can probably get a pretty good price on it. You might be able to use coupons, it might be on sale, there's all sorts of things that might make looking locally worthwhile. Definitely for items like paint brushes, there's no way you're going to get a better price online than you are by just going into a painting store and picking up a decent quality paintbrush. Especially a lot of the sets that are sort of marketed to miniature painters online. They definitely are premium price for a premium product, but good quality just plain painting brush from an art store. Although it's still going to be expensive compared to if you buy your paintbrushes at Dollarama like I did for a long time. You'll definitely be able to get more affordable premium brushes locally. However, for products like the Vallejo Flow Improver, Basically anything Vallejo I never really was able to get near me. There's a bit of a Vallejo selection at my local hobby shop, but it's actually closing. And even then they never had the boxed sets. So products like that, I am going to list in my description. As an Amazon affiliate, I do earn on any qualifying purchases you make. I have to make that disclaimer, and I want to be honest with you about that. I will earn a certain commission on anything you make. That will obviously turn back into supporting this channel and purchasing future paints, miniatures, stuff like that we can paint up and show off on the channel here, hopefully, if you all enjoy it. That would be very much appreciated, but like I said, don't do it unless you've looked locally and you've gotten the best deal for yourself. Obviously that comes first and above all else. You can see here I'm taking a bit of advantage of the fact that I'm using thinned black paint. Bit of a segue here, but the thin black ink is great, especially for a character like Bronn. Part of the reason I wanted his coat to be black and not brown was in terms of creating bands of color. I wanted to separate the brown of the leather around his weird chain infinity scarf thing from the brown of his gambazon and his pants. But also that I knew that if I was applying black, I'd be able to just layer the bottom of that skirt where it's flaring and just make it both look in shadow and also keep it in tune with the color of the coat itself. So just kind of keeping those design ideas in mind as you plan forward on your miniatures can help you a lot. You'll go forward and it'll all make a lot more sense as you start laying down the colors next to each other. I'm trying to be very accurate with this. Once you've added that much flow improver, you'll see it can start to run quite a bit. Obviously removing the surface tension does mean that it's going to be very runny. So I've got another brush on hand and I just dabbed away a little area where it ran away. I'm going to be doing some corrections like that. The big other advantage with black is that while I would never recommend using black as your primary shader if you're trying to get a somewhat realistic color palette, just because shadow is rarely purely black. I discussed this a little bit in Season 1, but you're going to want to sort of mix more colors together and use a shadow that's actually based on the base color that you're applying if you want to do a real shadow. But if you just had a little bit of black flow over onto another surface, just sort of wicking most of it away and smearing the rest can make it look like a little bit of an undercut shadow, just like I did on the gambazon section that's under his coat there. As I apply it to his face, I'm also going to be cautious here. The faces are probably going to be the riskiest parts of what we're doing here in terms of applying black to, for example, him, or applying yellow and brown to the Lannisters, just because we want to be keeping the faces reasonably clear so that we can be exploiting that brown ink we've put on later on when we highlight out the faces to really make them pop. The faces are the only place that I really go in and put the time in to do extra highlighting with acrylic inks after the fact on these miniatures, just because the face is kind of where the human eye is drawn to, so I think it merits that extra attention. Aside from that though, we're really just going to be applying layers of ink just like this to thicken out the colors and make sure that we're keeping that relief, the surface sort of detail that the miniature sculptors already gave us. Going on from here, I'm going to thin my black even further, partially because the flow improver does thicken up over time, so you want to keep adding a little bit just to keep it at a workable consistency, or better yet, work with a different batch if it's really thickened up beyond where you want it to be. But also partially because now I'm trying to do Jaime's cloak. Jaime's cloak is another one of those experiments that didn't quite work out how I expected it to, but in the end I was pretty happy with. Basically what I wanted was just a pale gray cloak, kind of looking like dirty wool-ish, I guess. But at the time I didn't really have a plan. There I am talking about planning your miniature ahead of time. Didn't have a huge plan for how I was going to make it look like a dirty wool cloak. So I started out with just this sort of gray here and threw it on across the whole thing. You'll see the airbrush flow improver here. This is a really good example of how it can help you when it's at just the right consistency. The areas I've just brushed don't actually have a huge amount of brush marks. What is there is because there's still a little bit of old flow improver in there that thickened up. But for the most part, it's smoothing itself out exceptionally well until I mess with it there, and that's what I realized. I was trying to chase a bubble out and I ended up messing with it. So if you can just lay it on and let it settle as a single layer, the flow improver, having taken away all the surface tension, lets that ink sit much closer down to the surface of the miniature. It settles down right in the crevices and it evens itself out across the whole surface. Honestly, I very, very, very rarely use water to thin my inks or paints anymore. Now that I have that, its control of consistency is a really valuable asset in my toolbox, and I do recommend that you give it a shot at some point if you got some spare money to burn. If you don't have it locally like I don't, again, I do have Amazon affiliate links down below. Look it up on other websites because other places might have a better price for your local area as well. So what I did there, after I was done sort of brushing up the entirety of the cloak, and I sort of nudged it around, I realized, ooh, I dirtied that up a little bit because I was trying to chase some bubbles away. And I don't know why the bubbles were forming. Normally with the Flow Improver, bubbles don't form, so I was just having some issues there for some reason. But yeah, there were bubbles. I ended up chasing them off to the edge of the cloak, like you're going to want to do, maybe with a lighter hand than me. But I did smudge it a little bit, and I was kind of worried that it wouldn't settle out quite right, because I knew I had pushed my Flow Improver kind of to the limit, going with the old pool of black and then just adding more. So because of my concern, I added a little more black to the base of the cloak, and you can see it here. I'm still kind of working on it, because I figured, oh, well, long cloak like that is billowing right now, but it's probably normally dragging on the ground, especially if Jaime's feeling really dejected, as one probably would after the loss of their sword hand. So I was just sort of dragging that around the bottom, making sure it looked dirty. Now I'm going to thin that a little bit more by just putting some Flow Improver on a separate part of the palette, and then taking my brush that has black ink on it and putting it into the Flow Improver, so that instead of putting the Flow Improver into the big pool of black, I'm bringing a very, very little bit of black into the Flow Improver. And what that's going to do is that's going to let me just have a really, really, really thin amount of that black ink to put around the sling, so it looks like it's sort of white linen, just lightly shaded in the crevices. I thought that worked fairly well, and I'm being very careful here. I just put the yellow on for the hair. It's setting up already, but I don't want to mess with it and put some black in it. Much as I think a dirty matted look might have been appropriate for his hair at this point in his life, just like the dirty cloak. Now I'm going to be looking at it and sort of examining what I've done with the dirty cloak there, and I'm going to decide that maybe there's some more I could do with it. Earlier I was using that mixture of brown and yellow, now I'm just going to get some more brown and yellow because that does make a very sort of nice dirty effect, as it were. Making an off brown, you know, I just find, you know, your straight brown for dirt isn't the best. I'm going to grab that, and while I have it, I'm going to go ahead and put some on Bronn's sleeves, because I didn't actually have any, you know, color there yet. And I would realize while I was painting it, I'd done his gloves, but I'd sort of ignored that in favor of the rim of the chainmail hauberk thing he's wearing. Like, I'm not really sure how his armor works, but in favor of the leather edges to his weird chainmail hauberk thing. So I realized I needed something for the sleeves, and this brownish yellow, it's kind of, I mean, it makes me think of my Gambazon. So it definitely makes me think of sort of battle-worn clothing. And that seemed appropriate for whatever Bronn is using as an undershirt. And also to sort of thicken up the color on the Gambazon. If you'll recall from last time, I tried doing it with the thinned acrylic, and I ended up having some issues with consistency, so just putting some yellow and brown ink on there can help set it back up, basically. And it also made it look a lot warmer because of the yellow being present. I'm going to use that same yellow-brown ink, and I'm going to go around and I'm just going to touch up Jaime's pants, which were done with the same thinned acrylic that I didn't much like the look of. It wasn't contrasting very much. So I'm hoping a mustard yellow, dirty cloth look works better for the pants. What I really appreciated about all this was that even though I was trying to sort of speed paint through these guys, I was having time to go back and mess around with stuff and experiment like this. There's always time for that. Really, there are a few times that you can't cover up a previous thing, especially when you're painting with washes like this. If you're using acrylic paints, they're going to form a little bit of a layer every time you put them down, and that's going to obscure previous detail, especially on the surface of the miniature if you do it too many times, although you can still do it a few times. Like, it's not, you're not throwing on extra layers of primer over and over again or anything crazy like that. So, you know, if you don't quite look through the look of something, especially with washes, it's easy to just color correct it a little bit. I'm doing the same thing to the leather on top of his cloak here. I just wanted it to be a warmer leather to contrast more with the rest of his clothing. And so a little bit of this yellow is going to make that a warmer color. It's going to make it more vibrant, and it'll make it stand out a little more from the brown of his shirt, which honestly was looking a little drab in comparison at this point. Now, with my brush still loaded with a little bit of that brown yellow, I'm going to mix in a little bit more black, and I'm going to start touching up on the cloak where I've seen that I've gone over with my pant stuff, and just slowly building up a dirty effect on that cloak. You can see it spreading that brown yellow across the cloak, and well, I'm going to come at it, headlong, and really make the best of that. The cloak's still wet from the flow improver that I put on it earlier, so the bottom of it is just waiting to absorb a little more color. And so by feathering on a little bit more of this brown yellow, I'm smudging the black that we put on earlier, and I'm applying a little bit more of this color, a little bit of warmth. It'll make it look a little more dirty and grungy and grubby than just the straight up black would. And the fact that it was still wet means that it's going to slowly blend in a little bit. It's going to just settle in with the black that was already there. So overall, I was really happy with how the cloak turned out, especially at the end of this whole painting process. It did look like a nice dirty cloak, and I was quite pleased with that. So experiment a little bit like this. I'm tapping away with my brush. I'm just feathering it on. Now I'm going to get a little more flow improver and really thinned out and just carry on with the smudging process to make it really look like that stuff's been worn into the cloak. It's not a layer on top. It's been there for maybe days of marching. As I finish that up, we're actually coming up on the end of this episode, so hopefully you liked this episode. As per usual, I hope you found it either entertaining or education, or a little bit of both. And I'd love to see some discussion down in the comments. If you've got any comments on how I paint miniatures, or how you paint miniatures, how the two compare, what you think may be better from either way, or any tips you have for other painters, absolutely throw them down in the comments. I'd love to see it, and I'd love to participate in that conversation. If you have any ideas of what you'd like me to paint in the future, go ahead and suggest those. Go ahead and suggest anything you want, because I'm totally open. I do this, just partly as a skill building exercise for myself, and partly because I just figure I'm going to put out something that I want to see. And what I want to see is more miniature tutorials of a slightly different format than the other ones that are currently on the internet. Anyway, with all that said, thanks very much for watching. Thank you all to all my subscribers. I'm already up to 20. That's crazy. So thanks very much for popping back every week. Even if you don't watch every episode, I know this isn't for everyone, but thanks for bearing with me. Thanks for enjoying everything I put out. And until next time, go play some games.